Chapter 58, Telegraph to Mars. His lightnings enlightened the world. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. Their line is gone out through all the earth, and their words to the end of the world. Psalms 19:3, 4, 98, 4. We will now lay the polar cable, said Asterion. All went aboard the ship. Officers and crew took their stations. She put off and sailed to the center of the circle, then lay to, heaving and tossing amid the swelling eddies and spouting foam. It seemed as if we were all over the crater of a submarine volcano. This extraordinary phenomenon is caused by the magnetic currents streaming up from the polar axis. Beyond the circle, the whole sea surface, was flat as a floor and smooth as a mirror. The horizon immensely extended, as described in Chapter 9. "Take soundings," ordered Captain Susanak. Thalek, the first officer, cast the sounding line, counting the fathoms as it sank beneath the waters. In a few moments it hung slack. 260 fathoms, he called. The central polar sea is exceedingly shallow. The other terrestrial oceans are from 2 to 6 miles deep in many places, the Pacific deepest of all. Although the polar diameter of the globe is 26 miles less than the equatorial, the effective rotation, while in its primeval molten state, the terrestrial crust is much thicker and more dense here than elsewhere, being composed of the heavier and more compacted metals and minerals which form the crust. The thickness and density of the crust diminishes from the poles towards the equator. The physical and geological aspect of the terrestrial surface plainly shows this. Only 2 active volcanoes are known near the poles: Helka, within 1,700 miles of the north, and Erebus, within 800 miles of the South Pole. The numerous clusters of islands lying in the equatorial regions of our planet, which are the denuded peaks of submerged volcano mountain chains, many being of igneous or volcanic origin, show the great geological upheavals and submergences that have taken place in the relatively thinner parts of the terrestrial crust long ages ago. Thalek now handed in the line. "What's the character of the sea bottom?" asked Asterion. Captain Susanak carefully examined the little instrument attached to the plummet, which gathers up special specimens of sea sedimentary deposits of all kinds. "No sediment whatever," he replied. "Sea bottom solid igneous rock, mingled with magnetic iron core." "The very best for the transmission of the magnetic currents," remarked Asterion. "Exactly the spot to lay the cable. All the great ocean beds of our world are covered with sedimentary deposits produced by the death and decay of countless myriads of infusor and animalculae inhabiting them. In the early geological ages, these formed vast Tlgrph or limestone deposits covering our continents, then submerged but subsequently upheaved as the dry land, and which deposits support all animal and vegetable life. The organic kingdoms of nature owe their growth and support to the obscure and silent labors of these infinitesimal creatures. The coal that warms our habitations, the forests that clothe the landscape, the robes we wear, the food that supplies our tables, the flowers that bloom, are all originally the work of these humble little beings. This fact, however, touches not upon the original creation, nor evolution of anything in this world. As Mervart properly says, the doctrine of evolution is simply an attempt to guess at developing process. It does not touch the author of that process, and never will. The primeval igneous and crystalline rocks, the granite schists, quartzites, and not the calcareous prevail near the poles, and the seas in the immediate vicinity are comparatively free from these infusorial sedimentary deposits. "Stand by to unloose and play off the cable," ordered Captain Susanak. The men descended to the hold, where the cable was coiled around its huge drum. It was composed of twisted strands of a peculiar magnetic metal, unknown on Earth, of a bluish color and enormous tensile strength, far surpassing our finest steel. The free end was unrolled from the drum and securely fastened to a huge globe of a ton weight, consisting of several metals welded together and possessing extraordinarily electromagnetic properties. By the aid of a derrick it was raised from the hold, passed over the ship's prow, and lowered slowly down in the center of the bubbling circle, the men carefully unrolling the drum till the cable hung slack, announcing that the bottom was reached. This globe was an immense magnet. "The globe is exactly over the center of the polar axis," said Thalic, consulting an instrument attached to the derrick. "Precisely where the cosmomagnetic currents are most powerful," said Asterion. "Bout ship, play off cable, make for the shore," ordered Captain Susanak. The ship veered about, the men carefully playing off from the drum as she advanced. Reaching shore, the cable was lifted from the hold and laid along a deep trench cut in the rock to the superintendent's house, and passed through an opening in the wall to a private room. Burrus removed his other telegraphic instruments from the casket, placed it on a table, made the connections with the cable, and tested it. The electric spark shot from the key of the instrument. "Telegraphic communication is established between Earth and Mars," said Asterion. The cheers that greeted this important announcement were never heard over the poles of any planet in this solar system before. "If Lieutenant Hamilton will accept," said Burrus, "he shall send the first message between our respective worlds." I considered this the highest honor that could be conferred on any terrestrial man, and accepted it accordingly. Burrus had instructed me in the workings of the instrument, and I sat down by the table with the keys, dial plate, and bell before me. "Signal the operator at the south pole of Mars," said he. I touched the key. The bell sounded the next instant. "The operator is wide awake and attentive to business," said Asterion. "Good heavens!" I exclaimed. "My signal flashed across space, 120 million miles, and back again in less than half a second. Were it possible to transmit the signal through the medium of sound, it would require about 25 years to do it. Could one of our telegraphic wires be stretched from our world to yours, the message would require several hours, and it could be sent on a beam of light. It would take nearly 20 minutes. The reply to my signal seems to be almost instantaneous." "Much quicker than that," said Asterion. "It is not instantaneous, for that implies an appreciable interval of time. However brief, neither can it be called a transmission, for that also implies movement and an interval of time. It is simultaneous, if the term can be implied which implies no interval of time. It is an impact which, when applied at one point of an interval of space, no matter what the distance between them may be, is simultaneously felt or perceived at the other. In our scientific terminology, it is called alma, signifying together, or in unison, or company. The cosmic streams running between the poles of the planets are merely the medii through which this alma, or impact, takes place. When you speak of the speed of it, which is not a proper term to apply, for speed also implies time, it is like thought. The human mind, according to its breadth and development, can take in many things simultaneously, however different from each other, or widely separated in space they may be. In fact, can take in the whole universe at a glance. We think of Uranus and Neptune simultaneously. The distance between them, when on opposite sides of the sun, is about 4,500 million miles, nearly 50 times the distance between your Earth and the sun. It would take a beam of light about 6 hours to travel across this space. Could our telegraphic operators, with their instruments, be placed on both planets, the instant one touched his key, the impact would simultaneously be perceived on the key of the other. "Many of our fixed stars," said I, "are so far distant from us that their light requires hundreds, thousands, and even millions of years to reach us, and if one of them should be blotted out from our sight today, we should know the catastrophe took place millions of years ago." "Exactly. But if one of our operators could be there with his instrument, he could tell us all about the details of the catastrophe while it was going on." "I consider our friend Burrus one of the most dangerous men in modern society," said I. "He is certainly the most terribly nihilist I ever heard. His machines practically annihilate time and space, reducing those great words to nothing." Burrus bowed his appreciation of the compliment. "Does this simultaneous impact take place through the medium of the luciferous ether which fills all space? I asked. No, it takes place through what you might call the magnetic ether, which is much more ethereal than the lumiferous, as it is more attenuated than solid rock. And it is the soul or life, so to speak, of that ether, and bears the same relation to it that vital force or life does to the human body. It pervades the whole supernatural as well as the natural world, and is the foundation or substrata of the world of thought. In our language, it is called Omiyapa, or all-pervading. Really, my friend, interrupted Altaphora, if you go on etherealizing things much further, you'll finally reduce everything to nothing. And the whole visible universe, ourselves included, will be reduced to one single mathematical hypothetical point, said I, which will exist not in space nor in time, but simply in idea, replied Asterion with a grim smile. Which is much finer still, continued Altaphora, now that we don't care to be reduced to mere hypothetical idealities at present. Suppose we leave philosophics and attend to telegraphics. All right, said I. Here goes, and I again touched the key. My finger was still on it when suddenly were flashed out in large letters on the dial plate. Signal received long ago. What are you Martian tourists about over there? Are you going to sleep? Better send your messages beforehand. Business before pleasure, always. A good rebuke from our operator, said Altaphora. Your Highness is right, and I accept it, replied Asterion. Go ahead, Lieutenant. I again touched the keys. Make communication with private office of Grand Duke at Palace. Communication is made, flashed out the dial. At this moment, the clock struck 6. I touched the keys. December 25th, 1892, 6 o'clock a.m. terrestrial time, to His Highness Duke Altheon. Arrived all safe, Earth sends her Christmas morning greetings to her dear brother Mars, extends to him both hands in friendship and hospitality, and begs him to accept in fullest measure the assurance of her sisterly love. F.H. A few moments passed, evidently required for the recipients to reflect upon the message. Then the dial flashed out. September 22nd, 21,992, 6 o'clock p.m., Martian time. Message received. Mars, in this hour of his affliction, gratefully receives the kindly salutations of his dear sister Earth, and extends to her his New Year's compliments and greetings. He begs her also to accept the full measure of his fraternal affection, with sincere hopes that this opening year may dissipate the clouds of danger now hanging over him, and bring never-ending friendship and union, peace, happiness, and prosperity to both worlds. S.T. The reply was sent out by Princess Sulima, to whom was delegated the first salute of Mars to Earth, an honor which the President of the United States, or Queen Victoria, or any monarch of Europe might have been proud to receive. Really, said Altaphora, our Martian New Year and your terrestrial Christmas come pretty close together. So much the better, I replied. They are the most joyous days on the calendar of time and bring happiness to countless millions of hearts on our world. But while it is evening with us up there, it is morning with you down here. Our world being 48 million miles nearer the sun than yours, we consequently get daybreak 12 hours earlier. Altaphora, Asterion, and the whole party began to send messages to their families, friends, and acquaintances, and such showers of salutations, compliments, greetings, and wishes for many happy returns flashed back and forth between Mars and Earth, as would have astonished the crabbed old monarchs of chaos, and made him swear that a high-class Christmas dinner party and a New Year's reception between denizens of different worlds were simultaneously going on in his unsocial domains. Asterion placed his aerial telegraph on the table alongside the interplanetary instrument, then to Burras. While we are on our journey in the airship over these Antarctic regions, whatever we may be, hundreds of miles away on land or sea, any message you receive from Mars, or any news you may deem proper to send yourself, transmit to me at once, and my instruments in the ship's cabin will instantly receive it through the electronic currents of this terrestrial atmosphere. We now left the house. Our baggage, instruments, etc. were removed from the ether vaults to the airship. Vidian and his assistants remaining behind to look after the cars till our return. We got on board. The ship rose from the waters 500 feet in the air and flew over the open polar sea, due north, directly for Observatory Island, 500 miles distant. In 2 hours we reached it, descended to the pier, were received by the superintendents and assistants, and escorted to the house where I had spent the previous winter and spring. We spent the day in arranging our plans for extensive surveys over the land surrounding the pole. Next morning we re-embarked and coursed at high speed many hundreds of miles over these regions, noting on my geographical maps the most favorable places that could afford refuge to the throngs of Martians who might be compelled to fly to Earth from the threatened catastrophe. By nightfall our ship descended near the shores. We spent several days in these surveys and came to the conclusion that these inhospitable and barren regions, covered with boundless fields of snow and ice, could afford but scanty shelter for the Martian emigrants, even during the summer months, and that they would surely perish from the intense cold and freezing tempests that prevailed through the long polar winter. It was therefore necessary to extend our surveys far beyond these regions, across the Antarctic Ocean to the South Atlantic and Pacific, among the clusters of islands lying there, and if possible to the continents still further to the north. We sped swiftly onwards, passing past the rocky ledge where my companions and I had been thrown out from the iceberg prison the year before, and the great glacier alongside which the Albatross had been moored. We followed the shoreline of the great bay our ship had traversed on her voyage, and reaching the 82nd parallel, came in full view of the great volcano, Mount Erebus, still spouting its lofty column of flame and smoke, while a stream of red-hot lava bubbling over the crater ran down the slope till it was lost in the glacier below. I now described some of my celebrated volcanoes of our planet to my friends. "You should see the great volcanoes of Venus," said Asturion, "hundreds of them, from 4 to 6 and 10 miles high, whose eruptions are so terrible 'twould seem as if they would almost tear open the very bowels of the planet, and with rivers of lava pouring into the oceans, converting them into boiling cauldrons for miles around." We encountered no stormy weather nor adverse winds, and sped swiftly over the snow-clad plains, ice barriers, and mountains ranges of the continent. Late in the evening, John, who was stationed at the dome, suddenly called out, "Look yonder! See big water!" We looked through the windows. Under the bright moonlight, a broad expanse of foam-capped billows extending on either hand, as far as the eye could see, appeared in the northern horizon. "What sea is that?" asked Asturion. "'Tis the great Antarctic Ocean, which sweeps in a circle of 12,000 miles around the south frigid zone of this world," I replied, then pointed to a snow-capped rocky headland jutting out from the shore. "That is Cape North, the extreme northern boundary of this Antarctic continent." We reached the cape and discovered a quiet little cove penetrating the land. We lowered the ship to the water, moored to the ice-bound shore, took supper, posted the deck watch, retired to our berths, and sank to sleep in spite of the uproar of the sea.